While many are closely following the confrontation between Sahel and Hamas, a little further north, a very different story is unfolding. There are people in Syria who consider the temporary US presence on their territory illegitimate and illegal. Anyway, no one called them there. And not just in Syria, but in Iraq. Here's a democratized country that doesn't want American troops on its soil either. It all started on October 26, when a drone with an unspecified launch site breached air defenses at the Erbil base and crashed into the second floor of a barracks. Luckily for the Americans, the ammunition did not detonate, so this time it was just a fright and a concussion of the brain of one of the soldiers. If the munition had gone off, the casualties could have been in the hundreds. Recall that Erbil base is one of several U.S. military bases in Iraq. In addition to the bases in Iraq, there are several similar facilities in eastern Syria. There they are guarding, in quotes, the Syrian oil fields from the legitimate Syrian government. In short, it's nothing new. And while we were all distracted by Israel's war with the Arabs, the northern situation was slowly spiraling out of control. So I went out, accordingly. According to the latest reports, unidentified individuals launched a missile strike on a U.S. base in Deir ez-Zor province in eastern Syria on Monday night. As a result, there are casualties among U.S. troops, the number of which was not specified today. The Pentagon is as silent as a fish on ice on this issue. But on Sunday evening, U.S. Air Force warplanes struck a weapons depot and command and control center used by Iran-affiliated military groups in Syria in the latest round of retaliatory strikes amid ongoing attacks on U.S. troops in the Middle East. Why did the Pentagon decide the attackers were linked to Iran? Only Allah knows, but it's very convenient to blame it on those officially designated as America's enemy. What's important to realize, there are about 2,500 Americans in Iraq right now, about 900 Kazakhs in Syria. A total of 3,400 people who have essentially become hostages to the war in Israel. The fact that none of the attacks since October 26 have been able to identify and pinpoint those responsible for the strikes already speaks volumes. American and Israeli intelligence slept through not only the preparations for the attack in the gas sector, but also the preparations in the east, in Syria and in Iraq. But far more interestingly, the Gulf states' intelligence agencies also tiredly covered their eyes and pretended to know nothing about what was going on. Not only that, there has been brazen and outrageous speculation in the Saudi and Qatari media that America's era in this region of the world has come to an end. Here's what the media is saying. The strikes are part of a broader deterrent strategy to keep other factions from escalating conflict in a region where tensions have risen sharply because of fighting between Israel and Hamas. The president has no higher priority than the safety of U.S. personnel and directed today's action to send a clear message that the United States will protect itself, its personnel and its interests, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in a statement. On Sunday, General Michael Kirillo, head of U.S. Central Command, also issued a statement calling the strikes a response to ongoing provocations by the Iranian Corps, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards and affiliated groups in Iraq and Syria. The United States will continue to defend itself, its personnel and its interests, the statement concluded. Attacks on U.S. bases have numbered in the dozens over the past 3 weeks. We see growing tensions around the U.S. presence in a region where they are no longer to be tolerated. This is to the question of how and what Moscow and Beijing can respond to pressure on themselves on other fronts. And here it is a good time to remind that the Strategic Cooperation Agreement between Tehran and Beijing is just the first in a series of such agreements. Similar agreements are now being prepared between Baghdad and Beijing, El Riyadh and Beijing, Kabul and Beijing, and even Abu Dhabi and Beijing. Thus, China is perching on several key countries at once, the Gulf, preparing the ground for economic expansion. At the same time, it is extremely naive to think that China's actions in the region take place without Russia's explicit approval and consent. In other words, Beijing and Moscow are playing their long-term game there, aimed at pushing America out of that part of the world. A U.S. attack on Iran is the worst dream of the U.S. generals, as the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz by the Iranians and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait by the Houthis would instantly follow. And that's about 30% of all oil traffic, which will instantly cause oil and fuel prices to skyrocket. Under such circumstances, the victory of the current U.S. president in the election in 2024 becomes unrealistic. It seems to us that Americans will find it hard to forgive a second hike in petroleum product prices, and that the U.S. strategic stockpile of middle distillers is running low. In other words, the attackers knew exactly when to attack. Let's quote more from the media. 10 days after Hamas launched its offensive against Israel on October 7, triggering the war. Iranian-backed militants have launched what has become an almost daily aggression, U.S. officials said. The Iran-linked attackers in all cases fired because they believed there were a very large number of U.S. personnel with the intent to kill them, a senior military official said last week. On October 26, in the first strikes, U.S. fighter jets hit 2 weapons and ammunition sites in eastern Syria that officials said were used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and affiliated groups. Iran wants to cover up its involvement and denies its role in these attacks on our forces. We're not going to let them, Austin said at the time. If attacks by Iran's proxies against U.S. forces continue, we will not hesitate to take further necessary action to protect our people. And what is also interesting is that if in the first days Pentagon generals said that the attacking militants were more aimed at displacing rather than killing personnel at U.S. military bases, now the situation has changed dramatically. Any air attack is now met with a retaliatory strike on the bases. How long all this will go on, no one knows. In any case, the U.S. does not have the ability to build up its military grouping in those areas today. America has the resources, of course, no matter what anyone says about it. Suffice it to say that aid for a neighboring country, a country with which we are in conflict, had to be cut from $60 billion to $425 million. That's if we're talking about an emergency package. And what will happen with long-term care is anyone's guess. Here's what else the media is reporting. David Schenker, a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy think tank, warned that while neither Iran and its allied groups nor the United States seems to want a direct confrontation, the risks are growing. The possibility of a major strike that would draw America into conflict is a very realistic concern, he said. I think they are calibrating attacks to harass rather than kill massed U.S. troops, he said of Iraqi and Syrian militias. But they can do so much more. Amid wars in our neighboring country and Israel, only a war with Iran was all America needed. In that case, there would be no funds, weapons, or forces left for Taiwan. And the Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives will raise such a howl that it will be heard even in Tel Aviv. And douchey Trump will again claim that Biden just gave Taiwan to Beijing, harming America's national interests. So we continue to watch closely not only the gas sector and Lebanon, but also Syria and Iraq. There seems to be an equally important and dramatic act of war in Israel unfolding there. And everyone will be very interested in where the terrified Marines will run from their base at the Kanika field in Syria. I don't think they're going to be left alone anymore.